Hello and welcome back to the From My Prospective podcast, where I, Jackson McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football and NFL landscapes that could be changing the football landscape in the very near future. Now, before we get into this, go ahead and hit subscribe for me. It helps me out a ton. Now that you've already done that, we're just kind of counting our way down to college football starting. And unfortunately for me, I get a bit ahead of myself. I get to thinking a little bit too far down the road. So today, we're going to be looking at what could potentially happen after this upcoming season ends. We're looking at 9 coaches that I believe could, be moving on to a different school. And, you might be asking yourself, why 9? That's such a specific number. Well, it's because I've got 3 of each category, and those categories would be elevated. So that means that they are currently the head coach at probably a group of 5 or like a lower ranked Power 5 school. They could be elevating up to a better conference. You've got fired, obviously. That implies that the coach that is currently there is not doing their job. It's more likely than not a Power 5 to a group of 5 jump. And then you've got promoted, which are coordinators that I'm looking at that could be leaving their current schools and going to become a head coach, whether that be for the first time, second time. It kind of varies within this. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. The first name I've got, Jamie Chadwell. I think that he is going to leave Coastal Carolina, and this one's a bit weird for me to predict because I could also see Chadwell never leaving Coastal Carolina and just staying put, staying the course, feeling comfortable. But unfortunately, I think Grayson McCall, once he leaves, it's kind of a natural ending point for Jamie Chadwell in the Chadwell era at Coastal. If you'll remember last year, I believe it was, he had the incident. It wasn't Missouri. I think it was Mississippi State, maybe. There was a job that was about to come open. And somebody had asked him a question regarding, do you think you're going to go to this job, or what do you think you're going to do here? And he's like, well, my wife's got a flat tire right now, so I'm focused on bigger priorities. He's very clearly aware that the interest is there and it is real for his services. And I think this year is probably the last year that we see him in the Sun Belt, at least for the time being. Chadwell has been the real driver and has very much so been in the driver's seat for Coastal's rise to CFB prominence. And I mean prominence in a real way. They've been in the top 25. They've been a very good program while he's been there. But I think a school like Auburn could be enough to tempt him out of Coastal and finally pull him in, to these big schools. And it's not like there's some unspoken rule where you don't hire Sunbelt coaches to move to the SEC. Florida just did it. They got Billy Napier, and now he went from University of Louisiana Lafayette. He's now going, obviously, to Gainesville. I think Chadwell could be the next guy in that step. And you look even farther back, Eli Drinkwitz came from App State, and is now the head coach of Missouri. So it's almost kind of a feeder system for the SEC. It's kind of an underrated conference that they like to pull from. And I do think that Chadwell could very much be SEC bound as soon as next year. But for him to make the jump to Auburn, which I named, obviously, that spot has to open up, right? Well, that's where our next coach comes in, Brian Harsin. I'm kind of surprised he's eligible for this list because it really seemed like the Tigers wanted to fire him and just couldn't find a reason to, realistically. So he's back for another season at Auburn, and the talent there does not look great. Just from top to bottom, you had a lot of guys leaving the program. You didn't have just a whole lot of top shelf talent coming in, and you already weren't all that impressive of a program last year. And that's no disrespect to Zach Calzada and those guys that are coming in now to Auburn. I just don't think that talent pool is quite there. Harsin needs to win like yesterday, and I don't see the current roster that he's going to be able to field being able to match the numbers that are going to be required for him to keep his job. I don't really want to say that Harsin's going to be bound for the Mountain West. The Boise State job is currently filled, but G5, I'm going to keep it kind of wide, let you guys use your own imagination, and it feels like he's almost going to be in for a Jim McElwain, Willie Taggart. There's a couple other coaches. Lane Kiffin got it a little bit. Obviously, he went to be a coordinator first, but feels like he's probably going to go get image rehabilitation. Butch Jones is currently doing it and failing it at Arkansas State. There's a number of ways to go out there and kind of rebuild your brand as you wait for another Power 5 to draw interest and let some of this die down. I think that's what ends up happening with Brian Harsin. So now that we've kind of got that Auburn job figured out with having Jamie Chadwell step in, take in that position. Maybe Harsin just moves to Coastal, who knows? But that obviously, those went together. This next one doesn't really pair up with these two. I just think that this next coach is going to be a head coach sooner than maybe he should be. And I don't want to say should, like earn, deserve type thing, but he's still very young, and it's going to be weird because he won't be able to be the head coach at his alma mater. This might even be an NFL jump. I'm talking about Tommy Rees moving, now that he is the full-time OC at Notre Dame, having to move away from the program that made him Tommy Rees. Marcus Freeman coming in, that automatically should be a pretty big tipping point for everybody that, hey, Tommy Rees isn't going to be a head coach anytime soon at this program because Freeman is so young, and they ended up choosing him over Rees, which for experience purposes absolutely makes sense. I think Marcus Freeman was the best hire they could have made. But that means Tommy Rees has to go somewhere else and find his head coaching spot. And like I mentioned, that could very well be the NFL. It could also be college football. I'm not super confident on what he does next, but I do think that he ends up taking that next step forward and leaving Notre Dame. Football right now is in the wave of young guys on the sidelines, and Rees has to be near the top of that list. It's unspoken at this point, really. Like, everybody kind of knows that they're just waiting on him to be ready for that jump, and he very much could be ready for that jump after this year, especially if Notre Dame performs above the billing of what at least I personally expect. If they win 9 or 10 games and that offense really looks good, I don't see a reason to kind of delay him being a head coach any further. And I said that I don't really know if he's going to go NFL or college, because I don't. Obviously, these are all predictive. It's throwing darts in the dark. But he's from California. He's a Cali boy. I don't see USC. USC obviously won't open. UCLA probably won't open. I don't think that they'd fire Chip Kelly. He'd probably have to go take a different job. But that does leave another California-based team in the Pac-12 that I'm very interested in seeing him, move to and perform at, and that's Stanford. I could absolutely see him taking over Stanford, kind of in a similar vein to the Chadwell and Harsin thing. These next two kind of tie in, and that gives you my hand, so to speak, as to what this next coach is going to be. But, that's the area of the country Tommy is from, and he could be tempted by going closer to home and being able to build up a football program there that is kind of at a restart point when you look at a lot of their roster. I think Stanford could be a really appealing match, and they're going to want young guys on the sidelines to combat Lincoln Riley. Now, whether Tommy Rees's future is staying in the Pac-12, I don't know. He could very well use the Stanford job to jump to the NFL, kind of like Matt Rule did with Baylor, and finally getting up to that big area. But I've got him going back. So obviously, again, means the Stanford job has to be open. That puts me at David Shaw. Now, he's been kind of riding a wave of luck, ironic, since probably 3, 4, 5 years ago now, and it's kind of come to a crashing point. I believe he's only won 3 or 4 seasons each of his last 3 years. So Stanford is in need of a turnaround and to kind of get things booted back up. Unfortunately, I think that means David Shaw has to go. There's a number of places you could look at him going. He could be the next in line to be, like, if Bill O'Brien were to leave and go be a head coach somewhere, he could be the next offensive coordinator at Bama, or, go plug in somewhere else. But I'm going to lean probably towards a Mountain West job, stay out in that part of the country. I don't really know where that path is going to take him. I'm very much in the dark still with that. So it should be interesting. He's one of those that, like, truly, I think I've narrowed down the search a little bit more with most of these coaches. I cannot say that I've really narrowed it down for David Shaw. Maybe he gets another Power 5 job. Maybe he goes to the ACC and tries his luck on the other side, or, whatever the case may be. But as of right now, I've got him staying kind of in that similar part of the country, whether that be a CSU or, wherever. Just pick a random Mountain West team. Odds are they'll probably have a little bit of leeway, especially with somebody who has Shaw's track record of winning like he had at the beginning of his stint at Stanford. So next, again, kind of detaching ourselves from those other two, we look at a guy who I do think will be elevated out of a conference, a group of 5 conference, and finally pushed into the Power 5, and I'm going Jeff Traylor. He's kind of made his name and made his mark in a very short amount of time. It's only one season that he's had 12 wins. The year prior, I believe he had 5. Don't quote me on that, though. I'm not 100% certain. But he managed to turn around UTSA so fast that the interest should be there in plenty. And I don't know. He's another one that I've kind of narrowed down. I think I want to go Big 12 with him. He feels kind of like a Big 12 coach. It feels like he'd fit in at like a West Virginia or one of those type schools that could be firing their next head coach. Traylor, I think, does make the jump up in this next upcoming season. And it may feel like it's a little bit early, which it is. But if he wins another 10, 11, 12 games this year, we've seen guys be promoted for less, and especially his resume that he's going to be able to present looks better than a lot of these coaches that have had multiple winning seasons at a group of 5 team. You've got an associate head coach at Arkansas and SMU, and then he's coached special teams, running backs units, tight ends units. There's a lot of versatility to him. He kind of brings to mind Brandon Staley. He was a quarterback in college, but he coached the linebackers, I believe. Like, he was all over the place, and he understood both sides of the ball. You'd at least get a little bit of that with Traylor, specifically with special teams and offense. You're leaning a little bit more heavily on that, but it's still 2/3 of the football game that he very clearly understands well enough to be coaching athletes in. Again, the Big 12 feels like a nice landing spot. They're moving towards a new era. Most college football conferences are moving to a new era and new way of life. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to say West Virginia loosely. That's not just a direct prediction, but that one feels right enough to where I can kind of ride that one out and feel comfortable in doing so. So yeah, Jeff Traylor is going to be moving forward, at least in these predictions, and he'll be, taking on his next job. It'll be his 3rd in 4 years. But now we've got somebody who I think will be moving to his 3rd school in 3 seasons, and that's the offensive coordinator for Nebraska, Mr. Mark Whipple. Now, he's not going to be getting any loving support and recommendations from Pat Narduzzi anytime soon, but I do think that his leaving Pitt and going to Nebraska might have put him in the best possible situation for him to be. Now, when you think about it, Scott Frost could very well be on the way out. If Nebraska underperforms, if they don't look quite how they wanted them to be, he's gone, more likely than not. And who does that leave, at least in the interim, to take over and then potentially use that launching pad to take the Nebraska job or go get a head coach job somewhere else? That leaves Mark Whipple. I think that he ends up being the biggest benefactor of this position. Then, let's say that Scott Frost does do really well. Let's say that he gets Nebraska to 8 or 9 wins and they don't want to let him go. Well, you got to suspect that Casey Thompson and that offense is going to be a large part of that. And now you're still looking at Mark Whipple praise because he could have been one of the biggest catalysts of their turnaround, going from a 3-win team to a 8-win team, a 9-win team, whatever it is. And getting in that position, I think, is going to serve him significantly better than where he was at with Pitt. Since I do kind of have 2 sides to this one, where he could either become at least the interim head coach at Nebraska or become a new head coach elsewhere with their success, I'm just going to kind of keep it at those 2, let you decide which one you think is more probable. I personally believe he'll probably have to leave Nebraska to be a head coach somewhere else, but it's still becoming a new head coach, and that's still a promotion within this. In order for a team to hire Mark Whipple, they're going to have to get over Pat Narduzzi's comments and believing that he passes a little bit too much, which is kind of where football is moving anyways. But there's a lot more to get over with this next prediction. I've got Hugh Freeze leaving Liberty, and the big part of this is because of the NIL becoming as popular and as prominent as it currently is. Obviously, he was he was paying players money that they could not be paid at that point in time because NIL was not around. But now that that transaction has become legal, obviously through a third party, with whether that be a company or a business or whatever, but now that players do get paid and they find ways to be financed outside of head coaches and through a legal method, I think that the line for Hugh Freeze gets a little bit longer, and he'll get plenty of suitors, especially if Liberty can rebound after Malik Willis left. Now, I was a little bit surprised that he didn't leave with Malik. Maybe he didn't have any offers. Maybe there just wasn't enough intrigue because he hadn't proven that he was, truly good to go and had done his full character rehab and everything. But if Liberty's still an 8-win team next year, a 9-win team, whatever, without Malik Willis, who was the driving force of their team, I think that Hugh Freeze should be getting a bump up. And should be moving on, probably back to a Power 5 school. Could that be Illinois or Indiana or, somebody like that? Potentially. I don't think he'll go back to the SEC. For one, I don't think there's enough job openings. And for two, I just don't see that being a feasible path for him right now, especially with all the younger coaches that don't really have any of that dirt on them. But a Big Ten job, an ACC job, they all feel viable to me. And he's just, I'm gonna say that he's not gonna remain with Liberty. It gets a little hairy about predictions down here because you have a number of like the Jeff Trailers and the David Shaws and everything, but Hugh Freeze is truly an unknown. I just don't see him remaining with Liberty. It was already kind of a weird fit to me that didn't make just a ton of sense. But now him moving out, going back to the Power 5, getting his chance to do it all over, I think that's what ends up happening. Somebody who's going to have to do it all over, but in reverse, is West Virginia's current head coach. I don't think he'll stay there, Neil Brown. I believe that he's probably headed back to a smaller team to try to rebuild something because West Virginia is kind of at a crossroads at this point. He's on the hot seat. I don't think that he'll be around next season, and that kind of plays in a little bit. That would open up that spot for one of the head coaches we talked about previously. I'm blanking right now, but that opens up that position for him to move back to a group of 5, and it's kind of become a weird situation because the Big 12 again is moving in a new era. They're trying to figure out what they're going to be with Texas and Oklahoma leaving, but you're getting BYU, Cincy, Houston, and UCF all coming in. So teams are going to be more trigger happy to get new head coaches in to try to figure out what's going to work. And if you have another even kind of underwhelming season at West Virginia, I think you're gone. And that's what I have playing out. I think I have them at 6 wins next year, maybe 5. That won't be enough to keep him around. I think JT Daniels is good, and I think JT Daniels raises the ceiling, maybe 7 wins, but I don't even know that 7 wins keeps Neil Brown around. Daniels is obviously an important piece that they got in, but when you look at it, a number of 3 stars and 4 stars left the program. Clearly, they're not gaining much confidence in Neil Brown, so they're headed out. The Big 12 is going to shake up, and I'm gonna go vague, go group of 5. He's going to have to build up another program. He's going to wait for another Power 5 coaching job, probably get one, maybe in the Pac or wherever. But that's all down the road. That's all hypothetical, assuming that he can go to a group of 5 and kind of rebuild everything again, which I believe will very much be on his plate. So that brings us to the final guy, somebody I think will be promoted, and I feel kind of bad about this one because I feel like I just got Arkansas fans to like me with the Sam Pittman stuff, but I've got Barry Odom leaving, and it's weird because I could have had him and Kendall Briles on this list. I think both would make sense. I'm going to go with Odom because, for one, I don't fully understand why he got fired from Missouri anyways. I get he kind of got a bit stagnant and things weren't moving in the direction they wanted them to, but he was still a really good head coach. He got the players the highest GPA in Missouri history. He was bringing things. They were winning games against ranked teams every once in a while. Like, Missouri is not ever going to be just some super duper powerhouse, but he was getting them kind of in a comfortable range where they're at least competitive in the SEC. He ended up going to Arkansas, becoming their defensive coordinator, and everything is just kind of taken off, and I think he'll become a head coach yet again. And I'm not even particularly worried about that. I thought it was coming last year. It didn't happen. I believe they just got extensions as well, both him and Briles. All that is just paying more money to the school, which, at the end of the day, it works out better for both parties. Because you're going to lose Odom one way or the other. There's no way that he stays as a defensive coordinator for much longer, strictly because he knows what he's capable of. He knows he can get a Power 5 job, and while, it's more than impressive that Pit Boss has managed to keep the band together, so to speak, I think that your first piece is about to have to move. As far as predicting where he goes, I've actually got a list of teams that interest me and I think would be very interested in him. We've got West Virginia, we've got Indiana, Syracuse, Arizona, Colorado, Northwestern, they could all come open. So Odom should be a primary name on most job openings lists this year, unless it's some big mega powerhouse that will obviously have their own coordinators to promote or whatever. If you're somebody who's trying to start from scratch, like in Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, schools like that, I could really see Barry Odom being a top 3 name to watch for. And you can kind of, pick what you want here, because I think he makes sense in all of them. And so him moving on to become a head coach back in the Power 5, get a real chance again, I think will work out well for him. And I do end up thinking that he'll be a very stable and formidable head coach. Again, I think he got fired from Missouri a little bit too early. I think he was doing a little bit too good of a job to let him walk. And I still don't fully understand why he didn't get a head coaching job after that. Or, and I don't know the full details. Maybe it was like a bunch of group of 5 offers, or go be Sam Pittman's defensive coordinator. He's like, you know what, I'm going to jump at that opportunity and rehab my image and, really build my resume back up that way. I'm not 100% sure, but it ended up working out well for him, whatever the case may be, and I think he goes back to being a Power 5 head coach. So who else do you believe will be on the move? Feel free to let me know down in the comments below. But for now, that has been episode 26 of the From My Perspective podcast. Make sure to subscribe, and as always, I'll see you next time.